Hey guys! Part 4 of What If Naruto Was Immortal and Existed Even Before the Gods Themselves. Hit like and subscribe if you like this one, and also please check the author in the description. Let's start.
We are pain, that's all. We are God.
Chapter 17. Honesty is a Met Policy. I'm weak. Too weak. The sage slammed his left fist on the ground in frustration, cracking the earth beneath him. His right arm was missing from the elbow down. The prosthetic he used hadn't survived the fight. Sasuke. He looked up and saw the prone form of the man he called brother. Despite the man missing both arms, despite the assortment of metallic stakes impaling his body, and the injuries littering it, his face was relaxed, almost peaceful. Sasuke. Damn it! His voice was hoarse from overuse. He'd tried everything. His techniques hadn't been enough. His best hadn't been enough. Kurama and his siblings' power only upped the extent of the collateral damage, something their opponents seemed to want, and even then, the Bijou were somehow overpowered and put to sleep or in a state he just couldn't contact them anymore. I have to admit, you surprised me, Immortal. Not many have done so. His opponent spoke from her place a few feet to his right. Her injuries were already healing, as were her ripped robes. A woman with a beauty only matched by her cruelty. That was the best way to describe Kagaya Otsutsuki no Gaia. Much like what Sasuke had once told him about high-level shinobi being able to exchange thoughts with their fists, at some point during the fight with that woman, their souls had connected. You have piqued my interest. At least much more than the other vermin infecting my body, she continued, her voice cold yet containing a twinge of curiosity. The sage had seen her true nature, and it was tragic. Initially, a mortal princess from the First Age whose kingdom was plagued by wars over the God Tree, she had prayed for an end to the violence and destructions. Her words were heard by Gaia herself, who at the time, growing hopeless with humanity's actions, had tasked her with finding a treasure, the chakra fruit, born of the God Tree. Kagaya had thus become Gaia's champion. However, despite her good intentions, the power of the fruit had not been enough, and so the princess took the decision to take the tree's power as well. This betrayal had been Gaia's last straw. She bided her time. Just as the princess' children grew up, and her happiness reached its peak, Gaia made her move. Using the very power she had gifted her, Gaia crushed Kagaya's spirit and took control of her body, opting to use it to purify herself. Her first attempt had ended in failure due to two sons, Hamura and Hagoromo, rebelling against her. Her second attempt had ended similarly, with both the sage and his brother putting a stop to her. Her third and final attempt had been a partial success. Humanity was gone, snuffed like a dying flame as the very earth they walked on proceeded to devour them, as their fight caused catastrophes to envelop the globe. Mountains erupted into volcanoes, seas either dried up or drowned continents, and the entire map of the world shifted. All that was left was a wasteland. He'd failed everyone. Do you hear me, mortal? Or have you lost your senses as well? Ugh, the sage struggled to raise his body. Perhaps I could save you. I could use a servant by my side. The woman tilted her head slightly, making her offer, one that she saw as naturally generous. The answer she received was a glob of blood spat at her feet. Gaia narrowed her eyes. Very well then, enjoy the rest of your miserable days. Alone with these last words, she vanished. All was silent around him, no sign of any living creature in this desolate wasteland. Naruto and Uzumaki felt all the fight within him leave him, and collapsed face down. He wept. For he had lost everyone. The sage's greatest defeat. Near Washington State Park, New York, 28th of September, 2000. Bahahaha. Stop it already, Pops. I can't help it. You looked like a grumpy cat. Bahahaha. The early risers around New York were treated to a strange sight this morning. A whiskered blonde man in a three-piece suit strolled down the sidewalk next to a blonde child in classy but disheveled clothes. The man had his jacket unbuttoned while he held his stomach as he let loose another loud laugh. The boy, on the other hand, seemed to be shuffling with his head bowed low, while he rubbed his left cheek intensely. Why won't it come off? The boy asked. The subject of his ire was a big red lipstick mark on his cheek. Evidently, Ria had been overjoyed over the news that a member of her family she had mourned could potentially be found again, and had proceeded to treat Zetsu like a plush. Hestia had, fortunately for Zetsu, settled for a hug. They'd left the penthouse not long ago, having spent the entirety of the night talking, or in the case of the two parents, competing over embarrassing their children. Ria won, but only because the younger Uzumaki had been too mentally exhausted to care, and her daughter had been seconds away from burning the entire building down with how hot her face had gotten. Naruto wiped a tear from his eye. He's been laughing for the last 20 minutes. He couldn't help it. His new friend was just so fun. Someone around his age, with his sense of humor, and liked to mess with their kids? Where had that woman been all his life? Coming to the US had been worth it, if only for that. No offense to his siblings, but he's been getting sick of all the maybe you should tone down the jokes, you'll never find friends your age like that, or the old your subordinates don't count, they respect you too much to tell you how annoying you can be, blah blah frickin' blah. Stupid Kurama. Fuzz but just can't appreciate gold tier comedy when he hears it. Ha! Just wait till he has him meet wait. Scratch that. Damn it, how was he gonna see his new friend after this vacation? He was going back home to do stuff. He didn't really have any plans for now. Should he invite her to Origuk? Or just come back later? Mole in plain sight could just be used again, or just place a Flying Thunder God marker somewhere. But what if they start taking additional security measures after all the chaos they Zetsu caused? He didn't want to cause more issues than he already had, especially since he now had to run damage control on all of this mess. Their two new friends had proposed several options to help mend the bridge between the Uzumakis and the Olympians. It could serve as an apology for the trouble caused in their homes and a token of good intentions. First was finding Pan, and from what Zetsu told him, he was getting close to it. Or at least his clones were. Naruto did worry about one thing, however. Zetsu's clones were usually easy to control because they were exact copies of their original. The problem arises when those clones start making clones themselves, and then their clones duplicate themselves, etc., etc. In his son's words, it was like passing a document through a copy machine and then using that document's copies to make additional copies. Sure, the text might be the same, but it would get less and less clear the more copies created down the line. It was why he'd always tell his son to either make the clones himself or limit the number of clones spawned from other duplicates to around 10 to 20,000, and to make sure a kill switch was always implanted. He did not want another reign of Zetsu's incident on his hands or a repeat of what his boy had done in the Taoist underworld back in the war. The sage shuddered. The thought of his own shadow clones rebelling and forming their own autocracy, or worse, causing absolute pandemonium for shits and giggles, was something he did not want to think about. Anyway, where was he? Right. The first option is Pan. The second option is having Ria and Hestia both vouch for them while they attempt to look for like-minded individuals to introduce them to. Basically a classic meet and greet. The last option was something he was on his way to address now. Evidently, he'd been told some things about the kids, specifically regarding their godly parents. Annie being the daughter of the smarty-pants Athena, the goddess whom he needed to speak to later on about some things, specifically about proper punishment. He hadn't forgotten about Medusa. He'd gotten reports from one clone he left back in Origuk with her, and the poor thing was trying to be better, at least. She refused the cure for her state for now, but she got along well enough with some of his subordinates. Luke being the son of that messenger god Hermes, the guy he needed to meet for a friendly prank war as well as a lecture on not being a deadbeat. Yeah, Hestia had made sure to tell him about the kids' pasts, and whatever she could recall from her observation of them. Despite his own protests, he wanted them to tell him themselves. Needless to say, he had half a mind to introduce their father's buttocks to his sandals. Frederick could be somewhat excused for being immortal and woefully unprepared for the unnatural. Hermes? The brat needed to have a meeting with his son ASAP to straighten things out. He could already see Luke was heading down a dark path in the future, something understandable considering all the bullshit he'd already gone through. He'll talk to the boy about possibly visiting his mother to see if there was anything he could do, after he apologized for his deception, that is. Finally, there was Zeus. The guy he also wanted to smack some sense into. From the nonsense he'd read about or heard to the guy pretty much putting the world at risk to get his dick wet. Yeah, no, an ass whooping was definitely in the schedule. Just as soon as he could get the whole matter straightened up, and maybe figure out a way to trap the guy in a pocket dimension for a little sparring. Wouldn't do to have Rhea angry at him for hurting the brat too much, even if he could use the humbling. Lightning or sky deities tended to have a bit too much pride to be healthy. Susanoo, Thor, Quatsi, or Arden 1. The Shinto god had been dealt with by his darling ray of sunshine centuries ago, and was knocked down a few pegs. Thor, from what he heard, was just as much of a battle junkie as Quatsi, but unlike his daughter, the god was someone he hadn't had the privilege of raising or meeting. As for Arden, yeah, that was a can of worms he did not want to open again, especially after the war. The eldest prince of Naitak was almost as much of a genocidal psychopath as his father Okwang, and conducted himself as such, albeit with a bit more poise. The whiskered man sighed. Welp, no sense in dwelling on these memories. For now, it was time to focus on the matter at hand. So he had to just tell them, huh? Alright, he could do that. Easy peasy, ramen slurpee. Later, at the hotel suite. You faker! A scream tore from the raven-haired demigoddess as she charged him. Easy peasy my ass, he thought with a grimace as he blocked the stab from a furious Talia with his palm, while Luke stayed to the side with little Annie hidden behind him. Grover just awkwardly stood to the side. So, the revelation hadn't gone as expected. Zetsu hadn't been any help, opting to assume his disguise and got to one of the bedrooms while Naruto gathered the demigods and the satyr in the main room. He'd gone about it as honestly as he could, mostly talking about being an immortal without really going into the specifics of his presence here. He even tried to break the ice with a couple of puns. When the older demigods started doubting him, he briefly showed them some of his abilities, like henge, ing into Grover, making the goat boy bleat in fright, or the classic shadow clones, and even wall walking. Those were the party tricks everyone usually liked. Not Luke or Talia. Annabeth had been shocked into silence, same as her older companions. Luke had snapped out of his shock first, and hurriedly pulled the youngest demigoddess behind him, while pulling his club threateningly. Talia, like the spitfire she was, went with anger over reason. She'd assumed he was a monster in disguise all along, or some other manner of weird creature up to no good, and thus chose violence. As he saw the girl's spear begin to light up in electricity, his eyes widened. Talia. Calm down for a sec, you're gonna burn the carpet. He tried placating her only to see her snarl. Damn it, that was a Persian rug too. Oh, I'll burn a bit more than the carpet, you liar. What, were you just looking to lower our guard to pick us off? Or is this just some sick joke to you? She fired back and once again went for an attack, one that he intercepted by simply grabbing onto the spear as it sailed by his head. The sage sighed. Damn it, kid, I didn't do this to hurt you. I wanted to protect you. We didn't need your protection, and it doesn't make sense anyway. Why do you need to hide if not to trick us? This time it was Luke who replied, a dark look in his eyes. Look, if you just let me explain. He raised his unoccupied hand pleadingly, but the two were having none of it. No! We don't need any more lies. So why don't you beat it? The demigoddess tugged on her spear, attempting to take it back from him. Kids, come on. I'm trying here, he said, almost begging. Well, how about you? The blonde boy was interrupted as the door to the bedroom opened and Zetsu, in his true form, albeit with a large band-aid covering his left cheek, strolled into the room. Silence fell among them as the small imp-like creature casually walked to the kitchenette in the corner of the room and grabbed the fruit basket before turning around and looking at the shocked group. What? The greenette said while munching on an apple. The satyr broke out of his stupor and shakily pointed at Zetsu. Ah! I remember now. You're that Baia Grover stuttered and went into a panic as the suppressed memories of his last meeting with the younger Uzumaki resurfaced. What? Huh. The other two weren't much better, while the youngest demigod opted to peek at the newest arrival with less fear than was expected from someone her age. Naruto sighed and rubbed his temples and let go of the spear he was holding, making the still struggling Taliah fall back. Who are you? Taliah demanded as she got up as fast as she could and turned her weapon towards the shortest person in the room. Zetsu looked at her, threw the apple core in his mouth before swallowing it and speaking neutrally. I'm Zetsu. Why do you look like that? You look like a monster? The Uzumaki interrupted her and took another fruit from the basket, before speaking up again. This is my true form. Pops insisted I have a disguise around you. You humans seem to get scared by the silliest things. I swear, he shrugged as he munched on the orange he picked up without peeling it. Huh! Both demigods were stunned, while Annabeth used their confusion to approach the two Uzumakis. Her voice got the two sages' attention. Why did you do it? She asked the most obvious question in the room. Naruto looked at her and huffed with a smile. He raised a hand, and despite the other two's protests, patted the girl's head, making her smile back. Heh. Kiddos always are the most curious, he says. His action made Taliah and Luke calm down a bit while retaining their glares. I swear if you harm a hair on her. The Ravenet took a threatening step forward. Yo, what? Zetsu interrupted her harshly, narrowing his dot-like eyes. Kill us? Hurt us? You realize we could have done that to you at any time, right? Hell, the only reason. Zetsu. That's enough. This time, Naruto was the one to cut in angrily, his eyes glowing gold. While the two older demigods, and even Grover, tensed up, Annabeth was the only one unaffected by the anger, and instead raised her hand to tug on Naruto's sleeve. The sage looked at her, and his anger melted away. He rubbed his nose before speaking. We didn't lie about everything. Zetsu's my son and we technically are tourists here. But I thought only the Greeks. Luke raised a hand in protest. A common misconception among demigods and mortals and even some minor deities in each pantheon, Zetsu retorted, having finished his bast. He walked towards the two demigods and stood in front of them before continuing. Humans have many different beliefs and religions, and all of them, at some level, have some grain of truth to them. Seeing as his audience was silent, he continued. We technically don't belong to any pantheon and are just a couple of immortals walking around everywhere. I was bored of Japan and Asia, so we decided to come here for a short vacation. Since we didn't want any problems with the Olympians, we decided to disguise ourselves, he finished. All of them seemed to digest the explanation slowly before Luke raised a finger inquisitively. This ain't a classroom, boyo. Ask what you want. The eldest blonde in the room chuckled. The other blonde coughed with a small blush as Taliah side-eyed him with a small smirk. If you were here to rest, then why? Why help us? He asked while scrunching his face. Naruto's answer was simple, yet left the others, once again, stunned. Why not? At their silence, he elaborated. You kids looked like you needed help, and well, I couldn't very well call myself the best father ever if I just left you there, right? He winked at them. He also ignored the grumbled should have just left them aside and avoided the trouble from his son. Annabeth seemed to beam at the information and ran to hug his legs, the action broadening his smile, while the other two digested what was given to them. But aren't you two going to get in trouble? The older demigoddess asked them. Why? Naruto raised an eyebrow at the question. He had an idea of the reason she was asking this, as he could pick up on her lingering suspicion. Probably something to do with how their motives differed from their own godly parents. You know, ignoring your duties or something? It's why our parents left us in the first place. Taliah clenched her fist as she said this and looked down on the ground in anger. So it was about that. He once again wished he could have a serious talk with these gods, maybe convince Ria to come along and twist some ears. They could bond over that. Nothing relieved stress like dishing out some parental discipline. The thought of it did send a small laugh rumbling through him, and he wheezed out a small giggle. The others found it a bit of an unexpected answer, and Taliah decided to make her displeasure known. What? What's so funny? she said, gritting her teeth just as the sage recomposed himself. Ma, sorry little thals, he chortled as her face turned red in embarrassment, while Luke hid his own smile behind a hand. It's just, we don't really have duties to hold us back, and we're not gods either per se. Then what are you? Grover, who finally found a bit of courage, stuttered out nervously. Before Naruto could answer, his son walked back to his father and stood by him, before speaking out. We're just tourists. Talia and Luke narrowed their eyes at the answer while Grover bleated in protest. Just as they were about to press the issue, Annabeth decided to let go of her hug and turn towards Zetsu. She walked towards him and squinted her eyes. The Uzumaki tilted his head in confusion. What? He asked. The daughter of Athena raised her hand, holding it face down atop of her head, then moving it to level with the greenette's hair. With her conclusion done, she giggled. Hee, I'm taller than you, she said cheekily while sticking out her tongue. Zetsu took a deep breath. Luke and Talia's cheeks puffed out, while Grover blinked in wonder. You, the younger Uzumaki, made to lunge at the girl, only to be intercepted by his father. Baha dash, oh Annie! Bahaha, why you got him good, bahahaha! The man held his squirming son as he cried tears of laughter. Pops! All in all, the revelation could have gone worse. Takamagara, hours earlier. There were stark differences between the Shinto and Greek gods. Apollo knew that, of course, be it on a cultural level, when it comes to abilities or even just general behavior. He'd seen a lot of Japan in the years he'd been visiting it, or at least the areas he was allowed into. He loved a lot of things about the country, to the point some might as well call him a weeb, or as he liked to refer to himself, a man of culture. Speaking of culture, he'd been hoping to get some new art for his collection. Art he'd fade before letting someone like his sister, or worse, his Uncle P know about. He shuddered at the thought of the god of the seas finding out what mortals got off to in these particular pieces. Unfortunately for him, he had the distinct feeling he wouldn't be doing any tourism this time. Tsukuyomi had been as hospitable as ever. That is to say, not much. The god of the moon had made Apollo land in Nagasaki, before grabbing him by the arm and dragging him off. After some questioning which Apollo, being horrible at lying as he was, attempted to answer while keeping his objective hidden, the other god had gotten a bit more aggressive, even threatening with a horrifyingly scarring illusion. What was it about? The god of the sun had honestly suppressed that memory as soon as the illusion was cast and didn't want to think about it anymore. All in all, he ended up spilling the beans, or at least a bit of information Athena had tasked him with. She'd only told him to look for a weird symbol that reminded him of a Japanese mon, too. It wasn't much, as his sister knew he could keep as secret as well as Aphrodite could refrain from gossip, so not at all. Anyway, the symbol was something familiar to the other god, because he tore the picture he'd shown him from his hands and looked at it wide-eyed. He caught a small but distinct grumble, something about a damn shitty old clown. Weird. He'd then told him to stand still, while he put a hand on his shoulder. The next thing he knew, the blonde god was walking on a cobblestone road stretching in the middle of an expansive, almost endless plain. There were very few significant geographic reliefs that weren't indicative of one of the god's temples, and he could spot some of the Shinto deities either floating around or walking on other paths adjacent to theirs. Most of them stopped what they were doing and stared at the new arrivals. The god of the sun, not one to waste an opportunity to show off, raised his muscular arms to support the back of his head, teasingly flaunting his body as he winked at a few of the good-looking gods or spirits they passed by. You can whore yourself out later, we got urgent business now. The voice of his guide, he'd personally call him Morden, cut through his display, making him laugh nervously. Whatever it was that symbol stood for, it had the Shinto's third leader on high alert. So where we going, Yomijiji? The blonde asked, only to have his shirt grabbed by the god in question. Tsukuyomi's face was twisted in a snarl as his eyes glowed a menacing silver. Don't call me that, he ground out as the Greek raised his hands in apology. Sure, Lord Tsukuyomi. Could you let go of the shirt? It's one of my favorites, he said sheepishly. The silver-haired god looked at him, but instead of letting him go, he opted to hold him with one hand by the front and roughly pulled him along. All right. All right. Easy on the shirt, Apollo yelled out. Tsukuyomi swiveled again and got right in his face, close enough that their noses almost touched. We're going to see the single most important person in the pantheon, he growled. Why you mean? The blonde gulped. Yes, my sister Lady Amaterasu, and I swear to Izanagi if you so much as behave in any manner that isn't exemplary, I'll make sure any woman you ever see will have the face of your sister. Are we clear? Tsukuyomi shook him a bit to drill his words in. Crystal! Apollo once again raised his hands as the other god huffed before letting him go and speed walking in front of him. Sheesh, what's wrong with him today? The blonde thought with a wince. Move it, Gaijin! The god screamed back at him, making Apollo jog after him. In the distance, he could spot a golden palace. While not as shiny as his own, its architecture was just as gorgeous. Apollo gulped once again, mentally preparing himself to meet the Shinto's patron goddess. Hopefully, his mouth wouldn't betray him again. Chapter 18: Opportunistic Blondes. Legends of the East speak of a slew of fearsome creatures. Be it gods, demons, or monsters of all shapes and sizes, the myths and stories were as varied as the very people who regaled them among the many Asian communities over the eons. Appearing in several works of literature, the most famous of which was The Journey to the West, the Nine Lords are a group of bestial creatures rumored to have been powerful enough to tear the heavens at the seams, especially in such events as the legendary Heavenly War. In the great Chinese novel, they appear as an assortment of demons who swear allegiance to the Monkey King, vastly different in nature from how they're depicted in other documents. Their forms may differ from one story to the next, sometimes appearing as a multitude of animals present in the Chinese zodiac calendar, and other times appearing in humanoid forms in contexts related to more diplomatic meetings between them and other supernatural beings. Even with that incertitude, a few things remain a constant in their tales: their initial animosity between one another, their feud with both humanity and the gods, and finally, their relationship to a 10th mystical figure. The Gallant Sage of the East. Excerpt from a thesis on religious studies written by F. Yasuhiro at the University of Tokyo, Japan, 1975. Takamagara, 28th of September, 2000. If there was one thing Tsukuyomi had learned to hate above everything else in his many millennia of existence, it was unwelcome surprises. Be it getting ambushed by his stupid brother, Kagetsuchi making another one of his mecha kaijus, the Shurchi-Fukujin's frequent acts of mischief, or the one Apollo had just unceremoniously dropped on his lap. He knew that symbol in the picture, but the Greeks shouldn't, they had no reason to. Not for a lack of possibility, of course, but considering the owner was someone who even in the East was considered a cryptid, it shouldn't be something they could just randomly find in their territory, let alone send one of their stronger gods in an effort to investigate it. He also knew the Greek god of truth had been cursed with particularly loose lips, thus if the only thing he was told was to look for information on that particular mon, it meant that his worst fears were coming true. The shitty old clown was off gallivanting in places where he should not be and has probably gone and stepped in shit already, something that filled Tsukuyomi with unease. Not for that man's health, obviously, no. That whiskered bastard could eat shit and die for all he cared, but he was not in the mood to restrain his sister in the events she wanted to chase after her so-called father. Again. The god of the moon had always hated the fact his sister seemed more loyal to that man than her actual family. He could understand holding some degree of affection for the man who had raised her. Izanagi had been a shitty father as far as he was concerned and deserved the fate he received at the hands of Amaterasu. But changing their policies? Insisting on an alliance with a faction most of the Pantheon was not familiar with at the time? Coming and going to that sage realm place whenever she pleased in spite of her responsibilities? That's not even getting into the fact that old clown didn't give a damn about interpantheonic relationships. He only ever did what he pleased. He needed to see Amaterasu, have her call, or just drag that guy back. That annoying, self-centered, irritating blonde bâtard. Hey air. Tsukuyomi, my man, I can appreciate the turb, but is it really that serious? It's just a scribble, right? Right. Speaking of annoying blondes, Apollo had been following him silently during their brisk walk after his initial outburst. The Greek god had been looking around him like a tourist, and Tsukuyomi bet he would have taken pictures if he could. For all his visits to Japan, this was the first time the god had come to their realm. It spoke of the seriousness of the situation. Thus, with a sigh, he decided to indulge him for now. It is just a scribble, but it belongs to a controversial figure here, the silver-haired god admitted with a wince. Liike good/evil controversial, or the blonde trailed off, staring at his guide expectantly. Not really, they're a good person, it's just that they have no respect for protocol. With these words, both deities arrived at their destination. Apollo was underwhelmed, to say the least. Amaterasu's home was not what he had expected. By that, he meant it wasn't a giant palace like his father's temple or a shiny architectural marvel like his. From what he could see, it was much more modest. Looking up, he saw a giant torii gate marking the entrance to a large garden with a cobblestone path cutting through it. The sun god could tell his sister would like the place, especially the multitude of sakura trees forming a sort of natural tunnel leading to the building. The temple itself was mostly built out of wood, with 9 amethyst stone columns holding up the front of the structure. Each column had a distinct animal carved into it, every one of those beasts with a different number of tails, from 1 to 9. Apollo could make out some of them, recognizing a fox, beetle, monkey, slug, cat, turtle, and a hare. Raccoon dog? Some sort of kraken with a bull's head? A horse with the head of a dolphin? Something caught Apollo's eyes away from the works of art and brought it to the double doors at the entrance. His eyes widened as he recognized the symbol carved into them, or what looked like it at least. He could recognize the design of a sun with a very familiar swirl etched into it. A swirl that looked eerily like the one he was tasked with finding information about. Weird. Was the whole thing some sort of calling card the Shintos used? But why did Athena ask about it then? Could it have been left in their territory? For the first time since coming here, Apollo gained a serious air around him. He could guess what the mission was about, and he didn't like it, especially since he was pretty much walking into the wolves' den as it is. Could the Shinto be planning something? Was he being led to a trap? It was a good thing he didn't come in his true form and had left a part of himself to fulfill his duties in his absence. If anything happens, that part would be instantly alerted and spread the news. We're here. Tsukuyomi's voice snapped him out of his thoughts. The silver-haired god turned and glared at Apollo. I'm just gonna say that this is serious business, so if you dare behave unprofessionally, I will be making you see something ugly. We clear on that? The god of the sun matched the other deity's glare with his own. Crystal. With that said, the double doors opened by themselves to greet them. The two entered and were met with one of the goddess's handmaidens who bowed low to them. Dressed in white and purple conservative robes, the blonde god noticed her feet were bare, yet did not seem bothered by it. Lord Tsukuyomi, honored guest, how can this one be of help to you today? She asked with a kind tone. Take me to my sister, and make sure to alert the rest of you that we're not to be disturbed, the elder god commanded, making the woman bow in understanding before welcoming them inside. As Apollo made to follow, he was blocked by Tsukuyomi's hand. The god of the moon looked at the god of the sun and gestured at his feet. Take your shoes off. Seriously? The god's answer was a glare that forced him to comply. Soon, both gods found themselves in front of the large oak doors leading to Amaterasu's office with the servant waiting for them there. This one wishes to inform you that Lady Amaterasu is busy at the moment. I don't really care, this is urgent, he waved the handmaiden away. The woman bowed obediently before walking away at a brisk pace, obviously intimidated by her superior. Apollo glanced at the back of the servant, his eyes momentarily drifting to her swaying posterior before his host's hand clasped his shoulder firmly. Don't fuck this up, Gaijin, Tsukuyomi's reminded his guest. Yeah, was in the Shinto's opinion, lazy bum's answer. As the door was pushed open, the silver-haired god groaned as he heard the voice of another annoyance. Come on, sis. At least bring him my designs when you go. A gruff voice pleaded. Tsuchi-kun, You know Papa loves your work, but that day is not one for business. Another voice answered the first, this one much more feminine yet retaining a level of strictness. I know, but come on. I know for a fact Lord Shikaku be having his yearly competition, and I feel like I could actually take home the trophy this time. Plus it's good publicity, you know. Of course, Kagetsuchi would be there. That annoying brat always had the worst timing when it came to urgent matters. And wait, was it that time of the year already? Oh no. Oh hell no. The elder god slammed the door open with a snarl, surprising the other occupants, while Apollo opted to peek from the door. Eh? Brat? Era? Yomi-kun? The silver-haired god had caught his brother in one of his classic pitches. The more imposing god of the forge stood in with a box of blueprints that he was trying to put on a desk in the middle of the room, while the other deity was pushing it back. You! The god of moon yelled, pointing a finger at the larger god. First of all, I'm older than you. Most of us are. Stop acting like a geezer just because you like looking down on others. Now get out of here, I got something of actual importance to discuss, he said and gestured for him to exit the room. The other god in the room stared at his elder brother for a moment before snorting derisively and taking his box back. As he walked out, he shoulder-checked the silver-haired god who glared back at him. I'll get you for this later, Tsukuyami swore. Whatever, brat, Kagetsuchi sneered. The insubordinate brat. Apollo felt a sense of déjà vu at the scene. The smith god, Kagetsuchi, was someone he'd never met before but felt like he did at the same time. Dark skin, red shaggy hair with an even shaggier beard atop of a mountain of muscles, and a gruff attitude to bring the look together. Yup, it was like looking at less scarred but older-looking Hephaestus. If he didn't know any better, he'd say his stepmother had twins when she conceived his half-brother and chucked one to the east. He briefly contemplated taking a picture, if only to show his half-brother and get a laugh out of him, probably asking if he'd cloned himself at one point. The idea was dashed as his eyes shifted to the other occupant of the room. His breath was taken away. Not an easy feat considering the company he kept, but also a natural reaction. Fact number 1 about Amaterasu Amikami: she could comfortably rival even Aphrodite in the looks department. Dressed in a manner similar to a high priestess, or Miko as the sun god's brain reminded him of the term, the patron goddess of the Shinto was a sight to behold. With hair as dark as the night sky that struck a contrast with her porcelain white skin, she could be called the personification of the ideal Japanese woman. Or Yamato Nadeshiko for short. It certainly helped that her amethyst eyes, soft features, and attire gave her an alluring, yet regal air. Her white haori with purple accents was baggy enough to conceal her no doubt voluptuous figure. He'd seen her in samurai armor and dawium, and was complemented by a pair of purple hakama all tied together with a thick black ribbon. It wasn't a surprise he'd been so attracted to her, or anyone else for that matter. He noticed his host was talking. Huh. Maybe he should stop staring like an idiot. I can't believe you're still going to that stupid thing. We had this conversation last year. Keeping up an air of calmness, the goddess merely raised a delicate eyebrow at her brother's outburst. Indeed we did, brother dear, she answered with a nod, and if you remember the result, you'd know my work was unaffected. The god merely glared at her, making her raise one of her sleeves to mask her giggles. Cute. Apollo thought with a goofy grin. Yofufu, don't tell me Tsuchikun is jealous? Her large sleeve concealed her grin. The elder god's eye twitched. Of what? That old clown? As if. He crossed his arms with a scowl. The temperature of the room suddenly spiked as Amaterasu's mood did a complete 180. She moved her sleeve away from her mouth, showing a severe scowl, and marched up to her brother before grabbing the front of his coat and bringing him down to her level. Apollo's eyes widened from his position, and he ducked back behind the wall just as the moon god's body was thrown through the doorway. Halia? You talkin' shit 'bout Papa? Wanna get your ass kicked, Bachomi? Amaterasu walked out while rolling up one of her sleeves, her veins bulging visibly on her arm and neck. Her voice, which had been soft and melodic before, became not too dissimilar to that of a common street thug. Just like that, Apollo remembered something about the goddess. Fact number 2 about Amaterasu Amikami. She flipped scripts from queen to yakuza at the drop of a hat and was extremely temperamental. Whoever this papa was, he was a button the Greek will make sure not to press. The temperature was rising dramatically, and the blonde god would have thought the entire building would burn down had it not been buffed with magic. Just like his own place. But as mad as he got, Apollo knew as sweat began to gather on his brow, that even he couldn't give out that much heat. Fact number 3 about Amaterasu Amikami. She was both literally and metaphorically one of the hottest things around and knew it. Just as the raven-haired goddess came before her brother, clearly intent on dishing out some punishment, she caught the sight of Apollo from the corner of her eye and stopped. Huh! Who are you? You look familiar. Her mood changed again, and she opted to look at the god in curiosity. In any other situation, Apollo would have taken offense to be forgotten. Now though? It was good. Gave him the chance for a fresh start. Hopefully, she also forgot about the embarrassing flirting incident. Give him a break. He didn't know she was the patron goddess at the time. He was too busy containing his libido. So, channeling every bit of swag he had in his being, he smoothly adjusted his position by the wall and threw the goddess his patented lady-killing smile. His teeth glinted too for good measure. A pleasure to meet you again, Amaterasu-sama, he said, making sure his eyes did not stray beneath her own. Her oh so beautiful pair. Wait. Amaterasu walked up to the god and brought her face incredibly close to his while squinting her eyes. Had it been any other time, the god would have taken it as an invitation to start putting on the moves, maybe pucker his lips for a kiss too. Not now though. Nope. He could practically feel Tsukuyomi glaring a hole into his head from his position in the hall. I think I know you, she said while humming. Apollo felt his lips twitch and sweat gather on his brow. Sometimes he hated his domain over truth. It gave him the shittiest poker face around. Bolo? She finally asked. What? Wait, no. Water polo? Stop. I got it. Mr. Popo. FFU. The Uzumaki's group hotel suite, same time. Luke was skeptical. I just don't understand why you're hiding it from us. If you want us to trust you, don't you think you should be honest with us? He folded his arms and sat on the bed next to the other two demigods. Talia had Annabeth in her lap securely while Grover sat to the side on a chair. In front of the group sat the two tourists. The blond man, still in his suit pants and white shirt, laid on a large leather chair while his sons sat next to him on an identical yet smaller chair. One that Luke did not remember seeing in the room yesterday. Regardless of that, they needed answers. Luke felt like the trust they'd built up had almost been shattered had it not been for both Annie and the Uzumakis making a solid argument. Even if they lied to them, it was clear they weren't here to harm them. That wasn't what happened. Hell, Mr. Naruto made the trip to the camp, which both elder demigods had expected to be filled with hardships, to feel like a vacation. They'd gone sightseeing, had some beach days, and in a way, felt like kids. It was good. But it didn't change the fact the Uzumakis lied and were still hiding things from them. I already told you, my boy, it was to protect you kids. Naruto smiled warmly at them, his arms resting on his knees as he leaned forward. Protect? From what? Monsters? How would knowing who you are change that? Talia interjected with a scowl, no doubt still angry about the previous scuffle. From being associated with us, the shortest one in the room, and Luke was careful not to voice that observation, answered them, only to receive a chop on the head from the father. Zetsu. Oh. What? Pops, they're never gonna let this go. At least give them the bare minimum so they're still safe. The son replied while rubbing his scalp with a wince. Ugh, fine, the blonde acquiesced his son's point. But you stay quiet, he added sternly. The green-haired immortal grunted before sinking into his chair. The blonde man adopted a thinking expression, muttering to himself in an unintelligible language. He looked at them before coming to a decision. All right, I won't tell you the entire truth. He raised a hand to silence their protests. But I will tell you enough to give you an idea of the situation. And how are we supposed to trust you? You could just be lying again. The raven-haired demigoddess fired back before Luke could get a word in edgewise. Naruto seemed to scratch his head a bit. I mean, there is a way you could know, but your minds wouldn't be able to handle it, he admitted. Huh? What do you mean? This time, Luke was the one to ask, eyes narrowed in suspicion. The blonde simply raised a fist in their direction. By fist bumping me, we can do a sort of soul meeting where we both essentially see the other's life. So? What's so bad about that? Talia asked while Luke slowly caught on to what the man was implying. I'm around 12,000 years old, he admitted, shocking the four mortals in the room. Had it been a few decades it'd be fine, but even if I just show you a fraction of my life, you'd only get confused or worse, get some serious side effects, he explained. At their shocked stares, he elaborated. It's like if your brain is a bucket, and I tried pouring an entire lake in it. It ain't gonna be pretty, he gesticulated with his hands to illustrate his point. The three demigods nodded in understanding and everyone fell silent, thinking over the dilemma. That is, until the resident satyr, and the most familiar person with the Greek pantheon in the room spoke up. Excuse me? Naruto, sir, Grover said, clearly trying to stifle the whimper that was appearing in his voice. Huh? What is it, Grover, my boy? There's no need to be afraid, you know? I'm not gonna hurt you, okay? Naruto said with a disarming grin. The satyr nodded in understanding before looking at the other demigods, who had turned to him expectantly. There's actually a way to err. Make sure you're saying the truth. Like a truth serum? Annabeth asked for the first time, eyes wide in curiosity. Grover bleated at that but shook his head. No. It's more of a sacred oath? If you swear on the sticks, it's a binding promise that makes it so that bad things happen if you break your word. Ah. Naruto slapped a fist into his palm in understanding. Pops, I don't know about this, Zetsu interjected with an uncharacteristically worried tone. Styx is a goddess, and since we said her name, there's a chance she's listening to this conversation right now. So we gotta be careful of what we say from this moment out, plus we don't know what that oath implies. It could give her information on us after swearing it, the greenette explained. Depends on the goddess domains, the blonde waved a finger. Even if she can use the domain of oaths, it'd only allow her to gain information related specifically to the promise being made, nothing about the user beyond the situation they made the promise in, he clarified. Luke was at a loss. He had no clue what they were talking about, and by the looks of it, either did his two fellow demigods. Mr. Naruto? Grover cut in again with the same nervous tone. Lady Styx, from what I know, doesn't have that domain. It only so happens that the gods swear on her name as a show of gratitude for what happened in the first Titanomachy. Her only other domain is hatred, or that's what I can now, he stuttered at the end, when he saw everyone's attention was on him again. Silence enveloped the room as everyone digested the information before Naruto slammed a fist into his palm again. Welp. That's great. He turned to his son. Do your thing, boyo. Zetsu shrugged, and for the first time since they met him, the demigods saw the greenette's form shift into the one they were familiar with, gaining 2 feet in height and becoming a teenage version of his father, with the only difference being the 2 whisker marks on each cheek. Luke wanted to say something, but as if reading his mind, Talia spoke up. If you can get tall anytime you want, why do you stay short? She asked with a grin. Annabeth giggled. Naruto's cheeks puffed as his face turned red. Luke was in a similar boat. Zetsu gave Talia a flat stare as his fingers twitched. Grover wisely kept his mouth shut. You're on thin fucking ICOW, the younger Uzumaki was interrupted with a chop from his father. Zetsu, the man hissed. There's a child present. Whatever, Pops, in a few years she'll be swearing like a sailor too. The son of Hermes could have sworn he heard the man mutter, not on my watch she won't, but chose to keep it to himself. The entire situation was weird. Was this what drugs felt like? A complete lack of logic? Anyway, the demigod looked back at the younger Uzumaki as he stood up and raised a hand to his heart. Me and Pops here came to the US on vacation. We knew it was Greek territory and didn't want a hassle since our presence is problematic to those unfamiliar with us. But rest assured we didn't come with any ill intent, Uzumaki looked at everyone in the room before speaking again. I swear to the sticks what we told you up until now was the truth. Everyone but the two immortals jumped as they suddenly heard the sky rumble. Huh. The Greeks got sound effects. Neat, Naruto commented with a grin. When nothing happened after that, Luke and Talia looked towards Grover, who sighed in relief. It's okay, they're telling the truth, the satyr admitted, with much less nervousness this time. Hold on, the Ravenet spoke up suddenly. If what you say is right, did Hestia know about you too? She asked. Luke jolted in realization. That's right. If Hestia knew about them, then how come they were still hiding? Naruto shrugged at the question. She did. But Hestia-chan didn't want to cause trouble for now, so she agreed to keep it a secret. Unfortunately, due to someone, he pointedly glared at Zetsu, whose side, doing something they weren't supposed to do, we had to come clean to her and look for a solution. Is that where you two were yesterday? The blonde demigod asked. Yeah, with Hestia-chan and her mom. Heh, funniest lady I've ever met, Naruto answered with a large foxy grin. Well then. That was that. Luke thought about their situation now. They had a powerful ally who was willing to help them, random kids he picked up on a whim for nothing else than an apparent act of kindness. A thought occurred to the demigod. One he was hesitant to share but thought there was no risk to it. Mr. Naruto, he spoke up, his voice heavy with uncertainty. When the man looked at him and nodded, Luke swallowed a lump in his throat and asked the one request he thought he'd never be able to. Can you heal my mom? Chapter 19. Is that a Motrcluckn? The Forbidden Mountain was a place no child should come to, and yet, one such child riding a boar came upon it, reaching a lone hut atop of it. What is it, kid? You need something? The voice of a man greeted them. Are you the sage of the mountain? The child asked. The man, one dressed in tribal wear with a large and colorful mask hiding his face, chortled at the question. Is that what they're calling me these days? Bahaha. All I did was make this shed here to relax like 50 years ago. Weird. Anyway, what do you want? He asked, his mask tilting to the side in curiosity. The child dismounted the animal, revealing a dark-skinned boy of barely a foot in height, naked as the day he was born and whose hair was done up in spider braids. The boy walked forward with a confident gait, up until he stood before the sitting man, his head barely reaching the man's knees. Sage, I request your help in a quest, he began. I have been turned mortal and tasked with capturing 4 legendary beasts to bring back to Lord Nyam. Only then will I be able to claim the story box, and go back to Out, the boy explained whilst revealing his true nature. Oh? Why would you have to do that? The man asked him. Suddenly, whatever confidence the boy had vanished as he nervously looked down at his feet. I might have, you know. The man titled his masked head and leaned down to face the smaller male with a hand raised by his ear. Huh? Can't hear you from down there, kid. Speak up. The boy briefly glared for the jab at his height before taking a breath and admitting his sin. I sort of, caused a lot of mischiefs for the others. Like pranks? In my defense, I was bored. A silence enveloped the mountain top as the man's eye holes seemed to stare into the boy. The man's shoulders trembled before he exploded. Pfffftttt bahaha. A guy after my own heart, eh? He yelled while knocking his head back. So you'll help me? Sure. Just as soon as my son returns. In the meantime, do you want some chow? I can make a mean wake I air. Anansi, my name is Anansi. The sage meets the spider. Olympus, Athena's temple, 29th of September, 2000. Artemis was getting worried. It wasn't a very familiar feeling for her, especially when it concerned her brother. Strange as it may sound, but on an unconscious level, she'd always trusted in her twin's strength. She'd always believed Apollo would pull through no matter the obstacles. Skill-wise, the twins were amongst, if not the best fighters in their pantheon. Their unrivaled talent with long-range weaponry and considerable close combat experience made them fearsome opponents to anyone, even among the elder gods. But when she'd felt the part of her brother that he'd sent to Japan vanish 2 days ago, she'd almost panicked. Yes, gods typically got much weaker when they left their pantheon's territory. So it was natural for his signature to dim, but to vanish entirely? The only reason she didn't explode into action yet is that the second part her brother had left behind to continue his duties hadn't shown any signs of distress. So her twin was safe just somewhere else? Alright, they had sent Apollo over at night, making his meeting with her Shinto counterpart a certainty. Crap. She knew Tsukuyomi had issues with her brother. She knew why that was, and pig-headed as he may be, she would not leave her twin with the moon god alone in a room. That was another reason interpantheonic politics were such a hassle. It wasn't wise to venture into potentially dangerous territory at anything less than your best, especially when immortals such as them were very likely to hold on to a grudge. So it was likely the foreign god had intercepted Apollo and dragged him somewhere. Or Apollo, true to his idiotic nature, went and stuck his nose somewhere it did not belong. I swear if he's there chasing skirts I'll dash. Her musings were interrupted as a cup of sweetened tea was put before her, her favorite sister sitting with a cup of her own on the other side of the desk in the gigantic library. You look stressed, sister, Athena answered the unasked question. The brunette raised an eyebrow. Oh? That's rich coming from Mrs. All-Nighter. The huntress allowed a rare teasing smirk to grace her adult features. The goddess of wisdom settled for looking to the side as her cheeks colored. It's rare to see you worried about your brother, the black-haired goddess said softly. Artemis regarded her sister with a small frown before looking down at her cup and taking a sip. Of course I am, he's... A blinding light enveloped the library as said God emerged with a frantic look on his face. An intrusive, lazy idiot. Apollo. The brunette got up and marched to her twin with an angry look in her eyes. Although if anyone were to dig deep, very deep inside, they'd see a smidgen of relief in her silver orbs. The man didn't seem to notice his sister coming his way though. Instead, his eyes zeroed in on the oldest of the two goddesses and his face adopted a serious expression. A small pit formed in the brunette's stomach. Athena! He almost yelled and practically bounded over to her desk, climbing atop of it on all fours and even getting uncomfortably close to the deity. Did you do anything to him? Please tell me you didn't provoke him. He yelled in her face, grabbing the front of her toga roughly. Both goddesses would have long since skewered Apollo with arrows or spears for less, but they could also tell something was wrong. Something was very wrong. Apollo, brother. I'm gonna need you to let go of me, take a deep breath, and explain yourself, the goddess of wisdom said sternly, her gray eyes reflecting a brief moment of anger before it was squashed in favor of a cold analytic gaze. The blonde blinked and seemed to realize his actions, before letting his half-sister go and moving back and down from the desk. He took Artemis' place while said huntress approached him and stood to his side. With a deep breath, he spoke again. That mark you've told me to look for, it's a Japanese mon. A clan crest? Athena raised an eyebrow. Yeah, that, an heir, it belongs to that sage guy from the stories. That sage of the East guy? Artemis cut in, eyes wide. At the god's nod, the huntress was about ready to flash out to Zeus' temple before her sister's words halted her. Hold on, Artemis, the gray-eyed goddess said before turning back to Apollo and narrowing her eyes. How do you know it's from him specifically? The sun god adopted a sheepish expression. Oh well, why see? Remember when I told you I never go at night anymore? At both goddesses' nods, although Artemis wanted to elbow her brother because she knew why he stopped his nightly ventures to Japan. Well, the reason I don't go is because of Tsukuyomi having a grudge against me and he sorta caught me. What? His twin screamed in his ear, her suspicions having been on the dot. But nothing bad happened. He placated his sibling. I kind of gave him the picture he pressed me, okay? It was either that or seeing Artemis everywhere I go. The blonde god stammered. Huh? And what's that supposed to mean, dear brother? The huntress made a point to twist her brother's ear in response. Oh, www. You think I want to see your mug on my mags? Why, you disgusting. Apollo. Artemis. Shut up and focus. Athena lost her composure, something she did very rarely. Apollo paused in his dispute, before coughing and recomposing himself. his sister doing the same with an innocent look in her eyes. Why that little dash? Apollo, Athena reminded him. Right, so, with a resigned sigh, the handsome god explained what went down in Takamigara. He went into detail about meeting Tsukuyumi, being manhandled and dragged to Amaterasu, and the ensuing conversation. The Shinto goddess, upon being briefed about the reason for the Greeks' visit, had been shocked, yet also ecstatic. The ensuing one-sided conversation involved him seeing a side of the mighty chief goddess that he'd never seen before. Amaterasu was a daddy's girl. That would have been fine and dandy with him if it weren't for the fact, when she'd started talking about her papa, she did not shut up. Apollo had been mentally exhausted by the time that goddess had finished practically reciting a thesis to him about her father's supposed feats and greatness. Then, as if to put the icing on the cake, the beautiful deity had decided a tour of her palace was in order. He chose not to mention some of the stranger objects he'd seen, like the jacuzzi-sized ramen bowl, or the giant mugshot of Susanoo near the servants' quarters. The god of storms had thrown a fit at some point and became banned in retaliation. Something to watch out for, Apollo noted. Plus, despite her multiple reassurances about the sage allegedly being harmless and not looking for trouble, the blonde god had trouble believing the literal pantheonic threat would be anything but. He'd read some of the books, he knew vaguely of the person that supposedly inspired the character Sun Wukong. He was a geek and proud of it, and watched most of the animes that derived from the original works. He'd heard of the stories and the myths, and as much as the truth might be stretched, he could not help but be naturally wary of such a big security breach. Then again, Amaterasu did mention her father was someone who enjoyed people being direct with him. Would it be a stretch to just tell him to go away? Athena, we need to inform father. The huntress made her opinion known but was surprised to see her sister raise a hand to calm her. I don't think so, said the wise goddess. If what Apollo said is right, there might not be any need for any rash action. The man and his supposed son don't seem to have any intention of causing trouble, especially since they made a point to take in 3 demigods. What if they're holding them hostage, though? The blonde god asked with a raised finger. In the unlikely scenario his threat level is a bluff, the man still has great influence over the Shinto. Provoking him could lead to a war with them, the wise goddess explained. Artemis suddenly adopted a nervous look. Sister, please tell me you didn't, the goddess of war pleaded, even though her mind had already formed the answer. The black-haired deity noticed this, and the corner of her lips twitched into a frown. Artemis, she began with a dry tone, you didn't do anything, did you? The huntress looked to the side. Apollo snapped his neck towards her. Sis, please tell me you didn't, he unknowingly quoted Athena's earlier thoughts. Might have. The brunette mumbled the rest under her breath. 2 palms promptly met the other gods' respective foreheads. This is bad. Really bad, Apollo nodded in agreement. New York, near Washington Square. The sage sat at a table by a Starbucks with his son and the other kids, all of them bar Annabeth, sipping on various kinds of coffee while the youngest enjoyed some chocolate milk with cookies. The man looked at his son, in his human disguise, as the younger Immortal distracted himself by watching the passerbys of New York, only occasionally chipping in on the conversation the kids were having. Since the kids have been let in on their secret, Naruto had taken the opportunity to wrangle his boy into his child form and put him in a cute outfit. The lad had refused to take off the band-aid though, but nevertheless, he had a feeling he'd made a wise choice. Luke, however, was silent, obviously lost in thought. Naruto could understand the kid in a way. What he did was a risk, but the boy was obviously desperate if the look in his eyes was any indication. A look that gained a feint. He was going to help Luke, that issue was a no-brainer, and was something he had intended to do the minute Rhea and Hestia told him about the kid's woes. Talia and Annie would get their share too, not like he had anything better to do. Really. This might have been supposed to be a vacation and all, but the man felt himself happiest when he helped people, especially mortals, who had much shorter and thus more meaningful lives than his in his opinion. It was sad in a way. He'd already done all that he had set out to do when he himself was mortal. He traveled much of the world, settled down, and founded a civilization in a separate realm, before traveling some more. He'd made many enemies and many more friends. He'd created and found his own kids and felt like he'd checked everything on his bucket list. He and his siblings had each gotten their own thing that both defined them and made that eternity bearable, especially since most of them tended to stay in the sage realm. Shikaku, the most childish, had embodied the role of an entertainer. From organizing his fabled competitions to creating their national sport, and even hosting parties and concerts. It was a jarring but welcome change from the psychopath he'd been. Matatabi, the most social, had, like him, taken a great shine to mortals. So much so that she had routinely disguised herself as either a pet or a young woman to live amongst humans and yokai alike. It would have been nice had one of her forms not been a cat girl. She had fans now, a lot of them. Isabu, the most bashful, had settled for a simple life of relaxation and learning. He spent his time either at the bottom of Origuk's seas or collecting books for his giant library. Son Goku, the most prideful, had taken to both studying martial arts and, in an attempt to assert his superior wisdom on his siblings, founded Origuk's military dojo in the process. Koko, the most motherly, had started various sanctuaries for all manners of creatures and spent her time in the plains, enjoying life alongside her countless children. Saiken, the most gentle, had spearheaded their medical programs, often collaborating with Isabu to develop their techniques and facilities. Komiai, the most playful, had taken to the sky, spending her time playing among the clouds and with other yokai, as happy-go-lucky as she ever was. Embroidery had also become one of her hobbies, with the beetle using some silk she produced to make giant tapestries depicting events from the lives of those she cares about. Gyuki, the most serious and collected, had assumed leadership in their military, one that was created purely as a precaution, acting as a no-nonsense general and strategist and often taking in Son Goku's rambunctious students. Finally, Kurama, the most shrewd and yet the most protective, had taken the role of guardian of their society. Even if Naruto knew the lazy ass spent most of his time sleeping on a mountain of pillows. As for him, he tended to live vicariously through others, one of the main reasons he was so helpful, even to strangers. He simply couldn't see anything better for someone than to live a life without regrets. But yeah. Back to Luke, if one were to consider both the teen's testimony and what he'd heard from Hestia, who had been told by Hermes, there wasn't much to go off of. It wasn't a physical condition from what he was told, but more of a mental, or more precisely, a spiritual issue. He didn't get all the details, but the woman had essentially tried to take in the soul of another creature, and something went wrong with the process. That wasn't uplifting news. There was a reason messing with souls was generally a big no-no for mortals, and the reason had to do with the fact mortal bodies weren't made to house more than one. There were a few rare cases of courses, but those usually involved external forces or methods. Seals on him and other Jinchuriki for one, could safely, if done right, house another entity, even one as powerful as a bijou, and give the mortal access to it. What May Castellan did was likely a failed sealing of a soul, either through hers or another's interference. In any case, it'll be ugly. This wasn't something regular Ryujitsu, or medical techniques, would solve, and even 12,000 years later, even with a mastery over Ninshu, he only barely knew how to suppress memories within an individual. Fixing a broken mind like one would fix a broken vase wasn't something he could do in his base form. So that left one solution: perfect sagehood. On one hand, he'd have access to any domain he wished to connect with, especially since he was going to be messing with souls, but it would be worth it for the blonde demigod in the end. On the other hand, that particular ability might as well act like a giant neon sign pointing at his precise location and thus alerting the Olympians. He didn't know what to do in that situation, so he resolved on asking his new immortal friends. That, and he already missed Ria's sense of humor, and believed it was his fatherly duty, to give Hestia-chan some good old HNH, hugs and head pats, trademark pending. But anyway, hopefully, the ex-Titan Queen and the eldest Olympian would know what to do. He realized he was asking a bit much from them, but thought it was for a good cause. Yeah. Family was as good of a cause as any. The two Greek immortals could be contacted through prayer or what passed for prayer. Psychic links were such a complex system that it served as a reminder why he never became a deity himself. While he loved his own followers, he did not need them assaulting his thoughts with praises and senseless requests. As his old friend, Shikamaru, would say, it would be troublesome. He already had to curb their tendency to build him and the Bijou statues, or come up with holidays, make offerings, start a damn cult. Also that brief phase where they tried to see if sacrifices would please him, or Shikaku, who had been ecstatic to see bloodshed in his name. Let's just say spankings at the time were being handed like they were on sale. In any case, the man sipped on his own latte, ignoring the milk mustache that had formed on his upper lip. He closed his eyes and just savored the moment. Yohavu, a cheerful voice echoed from down the street, making the group turn towards its source. Naruto felt his heart stop for a moment, and the same thoughts he had in their previous meeting resurfaced. Womama repeated in his mind before his sun-like eyes shifted to the beautiful Titanous companion. Oh! Ria had been ecstatic. While it had only barely been a couple of days since she had last met the Uzumaki family, she'd already missed the two new additions to her, admittedly, quite boring day-to-day life. Not to mention the recent news of Little Pan, hopefully, being found. While a tad skeptical of the younger Uzumaki's capabilities, he just looked too cute to be dangerous. No matter what the little imp said, she'd give him the benefit of the doubt. Plus his dad did say his son could branch out very well. Regardless of the trouble the two had caused, she was still very much willing to help them smooth things over. So when Naruto had made a sage decision, and contacted her tia with a request to help one of her great-grandbabies, she couldn't simply not get involved, right? So here she was, amidst many gawking men, and even some women, dolled up in her fall ensemble consisting of autumn leaves patterned dress that came down to her knees and hugged her more than generous form while teasing a bit of cleavage. Even with only a pair of heeled sandals and a purse to compliment her, she knew she'd nailed the look. "Mom, come on, we need to get this issue resolved soon," Hestia said. Ria rolled her eyes at her little girl. "Oh hush, baby. Let your mama strut her stuff a bit." She winked, and swung a bodacious hip to the side, striking a small pose, and making Immortal nearby pass out. Her darling daughter had, luckily, or unluckily depending on who you may ask, chosen to go out in her 8-year-old form, giving the mother a chance to pick an appropriate wardrobe. As if she'd let her baby dress up like one of those space wizards from Apollo's movies. She couldn't very well show off her little flame like that. A cute summer dress was sure to make her tia be the focus of attention of any doting parent. After all, the score was 0-1 in Naruto's favor when it came to embarrassing their kids. That would not be tolerated. I can't wait to see his face and meet the other kiddos, she thought fondly. She had babies to see and cheeks to pinch. Her determination renewed, she marched down the road from her home to the coffee shop a few blocks away, where the man had said he would be. As she came within sight of the place, she could make out Naruto's distinctive blonde hair even among the crowd. He sat at a table with 5 other children around him, all sharing separate treats and engrossed in a conversation. As her eyes briefly roamed his form, Ria hummed appreciatively at what she saw. Wearing a simple orange shirt with a pair of jeans, the outfit displayed his impressive physique. A pair of powerful forearms remained visible, decorated with intriguing flame-like orange tattoos. She remembered only seeing a glimpse of those on his hands and neck back at the dinner but thought nothing much of them. Now, they were oddly appealing. Gave him a kind of bad boy vibe she'd heard was all the rage nowadays. She felt her daughter stare up at her and internally scoffed. What? She could window shop. Not like anything happened anyway. They were pun pals. That's it. Yup. Electing to do something about it, she raised a hand and yelled out. Yuhuhu, she saw the man perk up and turn, giving her one of his, as she'd come to learn, foxy grins. She lit up before her eyes scanned the table, looking for the man's son. Seeing a blond boy sitting next to the man brought her thoughts to a halt. Oh. Zetsu felt as if ice was dropped down the back of his shirt. Oh no. Oh no. She was here. The Uzumaki turned to his father in panic. only to see him gain a serious look on his face. A quick check confirmed the woman had the same look on hers, and both had a twinkle in their eyes that just meant trouble. The blond man got up, his abrupt movement almost knocking the chair over and gaining the attention of the others. With his hands in his pockets, he started walking towards the Titaness. Rhea simply raised her arms to the side in response, in a gesture that might seem inviting, but appeared to be provoking. "Oh? Are you approaching me?" the green-eyed woman said with a smug grin. If one were to observe more closely, a shimmering golden aura appeared around the man as he advanced with a steady but powerful stride. A similar, but purplish aura appeared around the woman as the man came to a stop a few feet away, hand flexing menacingly. "I can't take pictures of our kids together without getting closer," he answered gravely, unsealing a camera. The Titaness smirked as she pulled out her own device. "Hoo-hoo, then get as close as you like," she answered back challengingly. Zetsu slammed his head on the table. "Fuck my life," the Uzumaki thought. Zetsu Gaiden, The Hunt, Quest for Pan, Part 3. Quintus was used to the labyrinth being a chaotic place. Albeit it was organized chaos, the kind that made it all the more satisfying to fool intruders and visitors. But this was not the kind of chaos he'd liked. Moments earlier, an intruder had come through one of its entrances. Then another from a second entrance, then another from a third one. As if the metaphorical floodgates opened, an army of beings, all looking similar to the first intruder, poured into the giant maze. Now Quintus usually wouldn't have thought anything of it. The labyrinth can comfortably take care of armies that size, even if it was still growing. Except it didn't. These imps were fascinating. They acted as if connected by a hive mind, dividing themselves into equal groups whenever they reached a fork in their road. Traps were useless as the imps proved to have regenerative properties. As for monsters, Quintus expected the ones he had roaming the maze to slow down the army a bit. Maybe lighten their numbers. Imagine his surprise when the imps took on a curious yet sickening strategy to take on their enemies. As if knowing that outright killing the monsters would have them turn to dust, the imps would jump the victim, dogpile it, then force one of their own into its mouth. The victim would bloat out, and then explode into dust, revealing one imp had become more. Basically a viral infection, except they also multiplied on their own like bacteria. So biomass was clearly not the only factor in its division. Even one of those could comfortably take on anything in its path, as evidenced by the few that separated from the larger group and eliminated the monsters further into the labyrinth. So, if one were to extrapolate their number from an initial quantity of 7 to 11,000 by using a simple squared multiplication, and taking into account the rate of division with and without consumption of biomass, he would be left with. Oh dear. A few thousands? That was fine. Tens of thousands? Still fine. Hundreds of thousands? Not fine. For original. A yell emanated from the army, as more shouts of agreement accompanied it. For a punless future. Even more excitement stemmed from the invaders. For the horde. A lone cry overshadowed the others. As one, the entire army stopped and turned to a lone individual in the center of it all. "Shut the fuck up, C420! They yelled as one. Chapter 20, A Brief Reprieve. Boom. The first meteor was met with a small ball of concentrated lightning, the resulting explosion all but vaporizing the falling mountain as the sage, whose tattoos had thickened to envelop his body, prepared another shot. Likewise, his opponent was not idle. The first meteor had been the precursor of the veritable shower that the Jade Emperor had seen fit to bring down on the blond man. "Lord of Vermin, do you understand the concept of devotion?" The red-haired deity spoke, his tone dripping with mockery. The sage ignored him as he was more occupied with the projectiles. Just as he began his counterattack, his senses picked up multiple surges of power from the city below him. Dread enveloped his being. In his mind's eye, a slew of golden portals had appeared, and from within them emerged an army counting in the thousands, glowing with splendor despite their less than benevolent intentions. Shouts of panic resounded from his people below him, sending a spike of despair into his heart. "Zetsu! Protect the citizens! Protect everyone! A scream tore itself out of the man's throat, accompanied by a slew of clones that descended upon the town, intent on saving as many people as possible. The main body meanwhile continued launching attack after attack at the oncoming barrage. His son had come with him today but had relegated himself to people watching in the city's plaza. Fortunately, that put him in the perfect position to answer the obvious invasion, as not even an instant after the order was given, an actual forest of wooden barbs and rocky points emerged from the earth beneath the city, missing every citizen while targeting the invaders. Devotion is not simply an act of worship, or an act of loyalty, it is a strength that only few can inspire. Offering your body to your liege is one thing, trusting them with your very being, whether alive or dead. That is the one thing only a true king could receive from his subjects. The Jade Emperor continued his spiel, even as his troops were stopped in their tracks, skewered by the very soil beneath them, preventing disaster. For a moment, Naruto allowed himself to feel a smidgen of relief, as his focus went back to his enemy. He noticed something startling. Okwang was smiling. Unfortunately for you, king of savages, the man's smile widened into a vicious grin. I am as true a monarch as they come. He spoke with finality and raised a hand, fingers curled in a particular motion. Naruto's eyes widened, and he rocketed himself towards the god, a large shockwave exploding from his abrupt movement. His body glowed gold, a glowing red raisingan formed in his palm as he tried with every fiber of his being to reach that man before he. Snap! Crack-a-ba-boom! The soldiers, be it alive or dead, had blown up, peppering the city with explosions and spreading anguish. Tens of thousands of lives were snuffed like a feeble flame faced with a gust of wind. Okwang! Naruto screamed in rage as his attack met the god's barrier. The Jade Emperor had planned this betrayal, and his vain expression only conveyed this truth. Thus, the first battle of the Heavenly War was in full swing. Assault on Jiren no Hankyochi. New York, near Washington Square, 29th of September, 2000. Talia never thought she'd ever feel grateful for Beryl Grace's deplorable parenting. But for all her vices, at least the woman was sensible enough not to make her kids go through, well, this. Click 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 click. Oh Hestia-chan, you little cutie, give me a smile. My adorable little Zetsu, don't be shy. Annie, who's the cutest little blondie? Bahahaha. Ho 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 ho. The daughter of Zeus had thought she'd seen enough bizarre things in the last few days. She'd found out the regular guy she'd thought was a super cool karate master was actually some uber powerful karate master, who she refused to admit was cool due to her prior experience with so-called benevolent gods. This morning, she'd found out why Zetsu was always such an ass to people. Anyone getting babied at his age would have a grudge against general affection. Now, she was wondering if all super old immortals liked killing their kids' street cred. Zetsu and Hestia being forced into a sailor costume and a puffy dress respectively, then into a photo session? Damn. Talk about just straight up setting your kid up for getting wedged at school. At least Annie was in normal clothes and didn't seem to mind the attention too much. Hell, she seemed to enjoy being treated like a little kid, and lording her superior height over Zetsu, but none of the demigods were brave enough to mention that. The two parents, one of which she'd learned was Hestia's freaking mom, aka her grandma who looked way too young and pretty to be a grandma, were both blushing while taking pictures. Talia, darling, come give Nana a big smile. The grandma in question gushed at her, and her cheeks colored in response as a shy smile made its way to her face. The very tall lady had made it a point to give each of the children, except Grover who was unconscious in a chair, a hug, an audible kiss on either the forehead or the cheek that had the two older kids blushing like schoolchildren, and pinched said cheeks. It was sorta kinda nice. Click 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 click. Oh, those freckles look so cute on you. Did she like the attention? Nah. Nope. Not at all. Okay, maybe a little, just a smidge. Give her a break. She's never had a Nana before. It's not like Luke was any better. He practically looked like a tomato when the tall lady shoved him in those balloons she had on her chest. How did anyone even have? Nope. She wasn't gonna think about this. I know, right? And she's a little son to boot. The grown-ass man gushed like a gossip girl. Son what? What did that even mean? Damn it, Mr. Whiskers was ruining her image. Ho. And look at Luke. What a handsome boy. I can see little Hermie in him. The raven-haired lady gave her 2 cents, making Talia inwardly glad she wasn't singled out. Said son of Hermes looked like he swallowed a lemon at that statement, as if unsure if he should take it as a compliment or an insult. Basically, McEdge being edgy, the usual. Mom? Can we focus for a second? And Hestia seemed angry if her strained smile was any indication. Zetsu looked like he was 2 seconds away from committing a felony. Yeah, maybe she should put her foot down too. Mr. Whiskers? Nana? Can we? She was cut off by a squeal and a hug from the grandmother. Mr. Whiskers? Ho. That's so adorable. So that's what Luke felt. A warm abyss, with the added bonus of gentle suffocation. Come on, Ria-chan. Not you too. Mr. Whiskers' voice sounded annoyed. But I think it's the perfect nickname for you. Ria, or Nana as the woman had insisted on being called, answered back with that weird tone of voice that sounded like she was flirting when she really wasn't. What's the word for it? Talia-chan only cat's a pass cause she's cute. Oh, she'd show Mr. Whiskers how cute she was by showing him the business end of her spear. Also, she was running low on oxygen, and decided to make that known by tapping the woman frantically. Oh? And I'm not cute? Her grandmother didn't seem to notice her struggles. Huh. I mean, yeah, you're cute too, but that's different. The man stammered. Different how? OUCH? Thalia. Nana finally let go of the demigoddess while holding her breast, after the latter decided to use drastic measures. What did she do? Naruto asked curiously, his eyes pointedly avoiding the titanous bosom. She bit me. The tall immortal puffed her cheeks, and for a small moment, Talia actually grew afraid of being smitten, smote? Whatever gods did to people who annoyed them. Ria seemed to catch her change of expression, and her own face grew from mad to worried instantly, and approached the girl slowly. Talia hated that she flinched a bit. Oh, you poor dear. It's all right, I'm not mad. Her grandmother finally knelt before her and hugged her, much more softly this time. Another smooch seemed to do the trick as Talia's worries faded away, and she hesitantly returned the hug. This was nice. Naruto inwardly eyed at the scene. Ria was a really good mom/grandma. Damn. It made him wish he had grandkids again, or nephews. The latter was not probable due to his siblings technically being sexless masses of chakra. They only identified as males/females due to personal reasons. As for grandkids? Well, he technically had some if you count all the mortals he'd taken care of and who started having families of their own, but it wasn't like he was always involved in their lives as much as his immortal kids. Zetsu was like the bijou in a way, a being with simply no need or desire to reproduce. Hell, his boy took it a step further and held a visible disgust towards the act in general. Amaterasu was a beauty queen and an absolute darling, something that moron Izanagi couldn't have seen for some reason. For all of Naruto's desire to be a good father and see his little girl in a happy relationship, it felt like he had to beat perverts away from her with a stick. If that Yomi brat or those other twinks thought their skirt-chasing asses were good enough for his radiant son, then they'd have an easier time getting intimate with his backhand. Quetzalcoatl, thankfully, was less troublesome. While just as pretty as her sister, the only time he'd ever see her want a guy intimately close to her was when she was crushing some poor sod's head with her thighs. Some weirdos seemed to like it though, go figure. As for Maui? While not immortal, the adventurer had lived much longer than the average mortal, and even if the blonde sage had been heartbroken after eventually burying his son, he had made sure the kid had led as full of a life as anyone ever had. He had sailed around the Pacific, fought the good fight, and helped mortals have an easier time on Earth. He'd ended up settling down at some point with a couple of gals and having a bunch of kids. It had been great for a while. He did have to distance himself again at some point, but last he heard, his son's descendants were still somewhere in the islands of New Zealand, and just as rambunctious as their ancestor. He needed to go there again. But in any case, looking at the Titaness and the demigoddess still in their embrace, Ria seemed like a natural at taking care of kids. Naruto wasn't going to lie, it was attractive in its own way. A cough interrupted the moment, and the two adults turned to see Zetsu with a frustrated look on his face. The sailor hat he was wearing was now crumpled in his hand, while Hestia simply removed the large bow Ria had tied to her hair. Hate to ruin the moment, but we gotta move it. Blondie over there's getting antsy, the Uzumaki said while pointing at the demigod in question. Naruto looked at the boy, who had a frown that could give Zetsu's resting bitch face a run for its money. His son was right. He shouldn't play with the poor boy's hopes here by delaying this, even if it meant getting more pictures for the scrapbook. Oh right. Ria spoke while releasing a now relaxed Aaliyah. She quickly got up and made her way to the poor boy who seemed to freeze in place. The Titaness then proceeded to repeat what she'd done with the daughter of Zeus. You poor baby, she cooed. Don't you worry about your mom, we'll fix this, even if I have to twist my little Sparky's ear for permission, she comforted the teen who blushed again at the attention. A kiss to the cheek had the poor boy looking like a tomato. Wait a sec, the sage paused at something she said. Watch, Ria-chan? Why would we need your kid's permission for this? His statement surprised her, and she turned to look at him with a raised brow. Well, we're going to explain the situation to him, introduce you two to him, and get things settled. Isn't that why you asked me to come? She asked curiously. Naruto scratched his cheek in confusion. Not really. I wanted one of you to block out my energy signature. Well, most of it anyway, he answered before mumbling something unintelligible under his breath. The two Greek immortals both raised a brow at the statement, thinking it over, before Hestia, realizing what he meant, whirled to face the man, her face furious. Why would you wait? No. Mr. Naruto. You can't just do whatever you want like this. She scolded him. As ridiculous as it looked for an adult to be lectured by a little girl, Naruto stood his ground. Well, it's not really like there's another way, is there? He said with a tilt of the head, and this time Ria was the one to answer. We just need to talk to my son. He'll work it out, she said with conviction. Does she mean that Zeus boy? The man was himself surprised at the notion. The one guy he didn't want to tip off to his presence right now. Or at least before he helped out the kid? Seeing their intention, Naruto elected to argue his point logically. Hestia was 2 seconds away from exploding into an inferno. As calm and patient as she could be, even she had her limits, and the two troublemakers in front of her were nearing them. She knew Mr. Naruto meant WL, she'd pretty much peered into his soul after all. Zetsu maybe less so, but he wasn't as bad as some of the less pleasant members of her family. However, both Uzumakis were really pushing it at this point. Zetsu making that army of his, even if it was for a good cause, was bad enough, but Mr. Naruto messing with curses was basically the equivalent of spitting at the Olympians' authority. The two had already slighted Demeter, Athena, and Hermes in a way. Any further antagonization wasn't going to help anyone. Oh, she fully understood that the father had no obligation to obey them, nor had they any business, or probably the capability, to try and force them, but no matter how you slice it, the man was sending ripples through their pantheon. Some of them good, sure, but several bad as well. She needed to put her foot down, she needed to. Then why didn't Luke's dad ask his dad for a cure? The man asked a simple question in response, and the statement had the teens and immortals wide in their eyes. What do you? Luke was the one to begin, but the older blonde raised a hand to interrupt him. I might not know much about Message Boy personally. Ria masked a brief snort at the nickname as Hestia glared at her, but I do know from what you two told me that he cares enough about his kid to at least worry about him and his mom. The sage finished his point. The goddess looked aside for a moment. There was a day where my nephew came to speak to my brother, she admitted. I saw them through the hearth and got the gist of their conversation. That's how I know of May Castellan's condition, she explained. The Titaness looked sad for a moment at the information. She was startled when Naruto came and knelt next to her, grabbing her shoulder tenderly. I don't mean to start trouble, Ria-chan. But I do believe in this situation, it's easier to ask for forgiveness than permission. He threw a blinding smile in the Titanist's direction. Hestia could have sworn she saw her mother's cheeks flush a bit, but chose to ignore it. That wasn't a can of worms that she was willing to open at the moment. So, she decided to take control of the conversation, Naruto, she drawled with irritation lacing her voice. The man waved a hand dismissively. All right, look, I just didn't want to risk coming out and have to disappoint the kid when King Boyo says no. The statement made the brunette's eye twitch at its nonchalance, but then he continued, since you got that weird law of non-interference with your mortal kids' lives? What? How did he dash? That wasn't public knowledge to mortals and many demigods who've yet to reach the camp. Something was off here. Yes, we do, the goddess admitted with a look of intrigue, but how did you even know that? She prodded. The sage shrugged his shoulders before pointing to the person next to her, which happened to be his son. The other Uzumaki took that as his cue to speak. What did you think I spent a month on Olympus for? He shrugged as well. The goddess of the hearth's eye twitched again, and she took a deep breath. All right, he'd done more than drive her sister to hysteria. Wait, so what else did he know? How big was the security breach? How much more do you know? She began grilling him, no pun intended. Zetsu's disguise didn't hide his discomfort at the question, and he elected to deflect it. Stuff? What sort of stuff, Zetsu? This isn't a joking matter. The goddess got up in the smaller Uzumaki's face, her narrowed eyes searching his. Not important, but if I might make the suggestion, you should really have someone fix up the time-space anomaly on the 14th Avenue next to the Lords of Greece Cafe, the Uzumaki supplied. Time-space anim, darn it, Hermes. She didn't want to point fingers, but the god of travelers had a bad habit of leaving a door open whenever he came in or out of Olympus. She could forgive it with the excuse her nephew was simply overworked and constantly in a hurry. But if even a foreign entity like Zetsu could find these doors, Hestia did not want to imagine who else could. Before the goddess could make her displeasure known, her mother decided to speak up. I think he's right in a way, Ria admitted with a frown, before she stood up to her full height and looked down at Naruto. As much as I care for my Sparky, I know how stubborn he can be. If Luke's father already tried convincing him, I'm not sure bringing a complete stranger on his doorstep would be better, especially one like Mr. Whiskers here. The man's voice sounded annoyed at the nickname, and Hestia twitched as her dear mother, sire of the Greco-Roman pantheon, blew a raspberry at him. Oh, hush you, the raven-haired immortal winked at the sage who frowned at her, before a smirk graced his features. Whatever you say. Big Mama, he grinned at her, and jogged ahead with a laugh. The Titanist squawked in shock, Hey! Are you calling me fat? Get back here, you! With that, she took off after him, laughing good-naturedly. The group looked on at the two laughing immortals. Talia leaned sideways towards Luke, and whispered conspiratorially, Think there's something going on between them? The blonde teen deflected the notion, I don't know and I don't care, I just hope they can help Mom. Annabeth chirped in from the other side, hugging onto the teen's midsection. Don't worry, Luke. Mr. Naruto'll definitely help her. He's a magic man. The older demigoddess chuckled at the youngest's innocence, and even Hestia cracked a smile, having heard the not-so-silent conversation. Zetsu, on the other hand, sighed at the entire debacle, and the goddess could sympathize with her fellow immortal. She too felt the urge to put her mother in a child harness. What was it with old immortals and acting so immaturely? With a sigh of her own, she elected to wrangle the two so-called adults with the demigods in tow. Meanwhile, poor Grover laid in his chair, knocked out and forgotten. Ria was curious for once. It wasn't a very familiar emotion as, given how old and experienced she was, there wasn't much that she hadn't seen. But her new friend's abilities were still an enigma. She could feel the magic energy rolling off him, as suppressed as it was due to some technique he had used, but could not make heads or tails of what he was. He definitely was no god, or any other type of ichor-blooded immortal, and even though he felt like a nature spirit, he was neither satyr, nymph, nor any pantheonic counterpart she recognized. He was an anomaly in a way, a being that made its way to one of the top spots of the totem pole in the supernatural world. There was also the matter of what he'd told her previously, concerning what he needed her to do. Blocking an energy outburst was not something just anyone could do. It could be done through two different methods, masking the energy outburst with a bigger one, thus making it seem like she was the one releasing power, or by creating a barrier that blocked most of the energy, and only let out a bit in a way that wasn't suspicious. As confident as she was in her own reserves, she had no doubt someone who even her ex-husband hesitated to fight would dwarf hers. So it came down to option 2, which also brought up a point the man had said. Having stopped running like children minutes earlier, they both elected to walk side by side at a slower pace than average, giving the others a chance to catch up. Mr. Whiskers? Rhea grinned as she saw the man twitch at his now official nickname, but then decided to get serious, Naruto. This time, the blonde paused and turned to her with an inquisitive expression. Yeah? Watch and eat Big Mama? Her eye twitched as well. Damn it. She sighed before deciding to ask what was bothering her. What did you mean when you said we'll be asking for forgiveness here? Are you going to make yourself know? The man hemmed before shrugging. Unfortunately, if we want to heal the poor lady, I'm going to have to take drastic measures. And even if you can block most of the signature I'll emit, 1 or 2 of your gods would still be able to sense it. What makes you so sure? Can't you suppress it? That seemed like something easy to do for the Titaness. I can, he said while nodding. The issue is that it wouldn't help. Perfect Sage with the technique I'm gonna use is based on the same system gods used to connect to their domains, and since May Castellan's issue is likely related to her soul, I'm gonna have to use the death domain, the sage explained. So you're saying, the green-eyed beauty trailed off, as the man turned and sent her a wink. Even if I used an infinitesimal amount of energy from that domain, the local death gods are still gonna sense it by simple virtue of it being used. It's kinda how demigods can be sensed by their parents. He waved his hands to illustrate his point. Rhea nodded, digesting the information and eyes narrowing at the implications. So what's going to happen after that? I ain't gonna lie. I originally wanted to just get out without causing any more trouble, but she glared at him at the statement. He better hope he doesn't run or she's going to drag him back by the ear. Oh wait, there's a but, there. I ended up deciding to face the music, and besides, he gestured back to the group behind them, pointing back at his son with a thumb. Zetsu's already found your lost little goat. He only needs to bring him back here and I'll do my magic to put him in tip-top shape. He wiggled his fingers and then raised his arms in a gesture of victory. We got our peace offering. Bahaha. Naruto laughed heartily. Rhea sucked in a breath at this development. Pan was found? Pan was found? And he was going to get better? He-she-oh, that magnificent man. Him and his son. Overwhelmed with happiness at the news, she expressed her joy the only way she knew how to. Chew. The Titaness skipped ahead, leaving behind a shell-shocked sage. Naruto held a hand tenderly to his cheek, tracing the lipstick mark that now adorned it, as his face flushed red. Rhea's cheeks were dusted a light golden hue. How forward of her! Zetsu Gaiden, The Hunt, Quest for Pan Part 4. Seitu was ecstatic. It had taken the congregation of clones almost a day to pin down the biggest source of natural energy within this maze. But they've done it. Sure, they might have divided a bit over the limits set by Original and Original's pops. Okay, so they might have overshot that number by a lot. But to be fair, the fact it took 1,480,042 clones to find this Pan guy should get them a pass for once. Maybe. Probably. Hopefully. The first clone stood in front of a large stone door that emitted a light glow. That was it. He felt a shiver of excitement at the thought of finally accomplishing his mission. He knew he'd get fused back into Original, but at the end of the day, that's just how things were. And it's not like they'll be gone, they'll just return home in a way. They were all Zetsu, even if the newer generations tended to be a bit quirky. With that thought in mind, he turned back to the rest of the clones, just as some jazzy music began playing from nearby. I thought I had it all together. But I was led astray. The day you walked away. One of the duplicates managed to sneak in a boombox, go figure. You were the clock that was ticking in my home. Changed my state of mind. But love's so hard to find. Zetsu ignored the music and channeled some chakra into his voice in an attempt to amplify it. Zetsus and gentle Zetsus, we got him, he said, just as the beat dropped and the clones began cheering. Your feelings changed like the weather. Went from clear to gray. On that cloudy day. Alright, that's enough now, Zetsu asked with a twitching eye. How can I go on without falling apart? Love's so hard to find. When someone's on your mind. Z469952 If you don't turn this racket off right fucking now, he let the threat hang as said clone cut the sound with a pout. With that out of the way, let's go back to our duty. The first clone turned back to the door. The rest stood silently behind him as he approached the structure and pushed. And pushed some more. He adjusted his position and put all his back into it. Nope. The door was still firmly locked. Seeing any amount of force wasn't going to do the trick, Zetsu voted to try and wrangle the door open by using chakra. Still no response. Ramming boulders, trees, or even attempting to cut it with a high-pressure water jet didn't seem to do the trick either. Huh. Option dos is a go then. Alright, so it looks like this'll take a bit more effort than one of us can deliver, so we're gonna have to fuse back, Zetsu began as he faced the army again, expecting to see them walk towards him in a single file line, as was the reabsorption process. He was surprised, however, to see them standing stock still and looking at him with a grim expression. Guys? A cough emanated from somewhere in the back as Z3 separated from the army and came forward to face the elder clone. About that. We're not going back. Eh? Yeah. We decided we liked fighting monsters and eating stuff, so we're probably going back outside to do that. Z3 explained. Zetsu looked at the rest of the clones who were all nodding with his junior's words. Oh hell, no. This was just like the Reign of Zetsus incident. Clones down the line began developing as individuals, and it was all the more likely the further the clone was from the original. Not willing to argue any further, Zetsu decided to forcefully absorb them by triggering the failsafe implanted in each duplicate. Making the ram seal, he said, well, sorry not sorry, you're gonna have to take a rain check on that adventure. We got a job to do. Thus, he channeled chakra and waited for the clones to implode. And waited. And waited. Huh, so they figured out how to remove it. Damn. Plan C then. He'd have to use an age-old technique. One so devious, wars had been started over it. One so effective, Original's pops had even forbidden its use. Zetsu stomped the ground as wood sprouted from it, and formed his weapon of choice. With zero regard for his actions and consequences, the clone threw the weapon in the air. Oh my god, a chair! One of the duplicates exclaimed. The army of Zetsus paused as they saw a wooden folding chair be thrown in the air, hit a nearby wall, and fall to the ground without harming anyone. Silence loomed for a few seconds. From the back, one clone broke the tension. I'm mad, and thus, pandemonium erupted. That's it for part 4. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.